When you've lived with ME/CFS for 20 years, meaning most of your life, your world has shrunk to your bed and you've been locked in freeze mode. It's hard to even imagine a happy, healthy future is even possible for you. But as my guest today proves, new chapters can begin, even after a really long time, in ways that you never thought possible. If you're new here, I'm Raelan Agle, and this is where we dive into real stories of people moving beyond conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID and fibromyalgia. No gatekeeping here, no fluff, just what works. I'm so excited to be talking right now with Ariel Schutte, tuning in from Saline, Michigan. Ariel became ill at just 7 years old, and over the next 2 decades lived through an avalanche of diagnoses: ME/CFS, complex trauma, MCS, fibromyalgia, plus more, including years of exhaustion and anxiety and pain and major life losses. And by her late 20s, she had tried just about everything: medical treatments, alternative therapies, even spiritual healing. And not having the finances that she needed to do so many treatments out there, she was feeling really stuck. And that lack of money was going to keep her from ever getting well. And nothing that she could do was working. But then, eventually, finally, she found something that shifted things for her dramatically. And she began living fully, pain-free, chronic symptom-free once again. So right now we're going to talk about what helped Ariel turn things around after so many years, and also learn about the really kind, wonderful person that she met in my Facebook group who connected with her and finally brought her hope and onto a path that helped get her where she is today. This is exciting. Let's welcome Ariel Schutte. Ariel, so wonderful to have you here today. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's just, it's just so inspirational for me to talk with you, and knowing, like we kind of mentioned before we hopped onto here, the group that you have on Facebook is the group that led me to nervous system work, which is ultimately what led me to recovery. So I'm forever thankful.
That's so amazing. Yeah, we work really hard to keep that Facebook just a positive, recovery-focused space with solutions, and there's so many great moderators in there that just are helping people every day. So I'm glad that you found it helpful, and then it led to something that was helpful for you after, oh my goodness, such a long journey you've had with this, starting with so young, such a heartbreaking age. So I know this is going to be a big ask because you're summing up a lot, but can you tell us a bit about how this started for you and what did that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting for me. It was that perfect storm, right? So I had a very kind of adverse upbringing, I guess I would label it, where I had two parents that had complex chronic illness. My mom had CFS. My dad had fibromyalgia and probably CFS. I don't think he was diagnosed with that. And they both were addicts, right? So it was a very dysregulated environment. On top of that, we dealt with a lot of financial struggle. There was some homelessness mixed in there, a lot of stress. What happened is I remember about the age of 5 or 6, I would get sick, but that sickness would last. So I would get, say, an ear infection, or I'd get a sore throat, or I'd get just a virus. And the people my age would have it for a week or two, and I'd have it for months. And that's when I kind of remember the first onset of anything like that coming up. But I first got formally diagnosed with something related to having a hypersensitive nervous system when I was around 7. This is after my father had passed away, and I had gone mute, completely mute, couldn't talk. And at that point, I went inpatient in the hospital, and they diagnosed me with somatoform disorder and post-viral fatigue. So that's when I first got diagnosed. But looking back, I can see that even before that time period where I was getting sick and it was lasting longer, I definitely had signs of, at the least, a dysregulated nervous system at a very, very young age. So that's kind of how it started for me. I had periods of time in my life where I got kind of re-diagnosed, or there were periods of time where what people thought CFS was changed, the kind of definition of that, and things were updated for me. But yeah, for me, a lot of it was kind of coming from an environment that was just very dysregulated, on top of having life's curveballs coming at you, and kind of approaching it with, a nervous system, an immune system, a whole system that just wasn't prepared for the trials and tribulations of life at the time.
Ariel, I am so sorry. How unfair that someone at such a young age, 7 years old, should have to be going through all of this. I just think how scary and hard life must have been for you as a little girl, and to go mute and start having all these problems at such a small age. Oh my. I know you're doing amazing now, and that is absolutely incredible. But wow, the journey to get here. Yeah, my heart really goes out to you. I just want to reach out to 7-year-old you and just give you the
Yeah.
biggest hug. I'm like, how can I help? I don't even know the questions to ask. What happens when this starts when you're so young? Your little self probably couldn't
Yeah.
even process what was happening, or like what to
Yeah.
do, and you don't have, you've lost a parent, now you've got one that's still struggling themselves. So what did that look like for you, as you over the years as a child and an adolescent?
It was difficult, I'll say that. And the first time it really came up where other people were concerned and involved is when I went to school. And obviously, I was mute. So they put me in special education because they assumed that it was some type of disability I had in that regard. Right. So they just kind of said, we don't know why she's talking. I would also have these one of the first symptoms I developed was dissociation. So I'd have these kind of episodes where things would become too intense and I would just shut down, go limp, and kind of mentally be elsewhere. So they thought that I was having educational and learning disability issues. So I was put in special education. And I remember when it came to physical education is where unsurprisingly, I had the most issues. And I remember the teachers and the people there saying, she just will not move. She will not run. She will not jog. She will not play these games. And I remember very clearly I didn't because of what would happen afterwards to me and what would happen during the event to me. And it started off by kind of teachers calling my mom and saying, why isn't she participating? Why aren't you kind of forcing her into this? At the time, my mom and a lot of the people she had talked to saw it as kind of almost like a behavioral problem, like an oppositional defiance issue. So it was treated at the time in a way where it was like, if you don't do the physical activity, there's going to be a consequence. And if you do, there's going to be a reward. Looking back, clearly that wasn't the way to handle it, but I can imagine that position. You just don't know what to do. And that's kind of
Yeah.
the experience I had. No one knew what to do. So going through school, even forming friends. And meanwhile, my mom was dealing with her own health concerns and didn't know what was going on with her. So a lot of the attention really fell on her, what she was going through. And a lot of what I was going through kind of slipped through the cracks at the time, right? So a lot of my behaviors and the symptoms that I had were seen as behavioral issues and seen as me acting out or wanting attention. So that's kind of how it was treated at the time. I remember one time when I was mute, when I was talking to a teacher, and she just said to me, like, what do I have to do to get you to talk and participate? And I remember having this feeling of, God, I just wish I could. Because deep inside, people would talk, they would do things, they'd run, they would be like holding hands and laughing. I also had food sensitivities from a very young age. They'd be eating whatever the heck they wanted. I'd try and eat the meals at school and I would get horribly ill. So it was very hard for me as a child because I didn't know what was going on. My parents didn't know what was going on. I remember being told, if you just kind of choose to behave well, things will get better for you. And I was trying my best to choose to behave well. I just had a body, a nervous system, an immune system that didn't oblige at that time.
Yeah, just sounds like child, a young child that just wasn't, obviously didn't have the tools to deal with all of this and was just shutting down. Like, yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, so heartbreaking. So no one really was looking at anything medical, or it was just sort of snap out of it. Ariel, why won't you behave?
Yeah, it was seen as, okay, your father passed away. Now you want some extra attention. We'll try to give it to you here or there. Okay, this is getting kind of out of hand. Okay, if you're going to do that to get attention, we're going to ignore you type of situation. So I remember going to doctors when I was younger. And I believe when I was around 8 or 9 or so, I was put on an antipsychotic type medication because it was a lot of the symptoms I had where I'd have these adrenaline surges, right? And I would just spaz out, or I'd even get periods of time where my emotions were so uncontrollable. I'd either be very numb at times you weren't supposed to be numb, or I'd be very hyper emotional at times you shouldn't, or it was seen as wrong to do so at the time. And this is beyond normal kids crying. I mean, I would lock myself in my room. I'd have my hands over my head. I'd be shaking. I'd be rocking and just hoping that that adrenaline surge, what I know it is now, would kind of pass.
So it's not, I don't imagine this just got better on its own. What happened as the years passed as you were a child? And
Yeah, so it's interesting. I grew up in Southern Florida when I was younger. My parents had moved to, my mom and my dad had moved to Florida from Michigan so my dad could pursue an education in psychology. So he was pursuing that. My mom was working her butt off trying to make things work. So in that position, my dad passed away. My mother and I experienced homelessness. It was a really rough situation. Some pretty bad things happened to both of us in this circumstance, which just kind of added to the stress, added to kind of the perceived trauma of what was going on. And then my mom met my stepdad, who kind of swooped in there a little bit, was helping take care of both of us. And he was a really kind of guiding figure for me at the time. But my mom still had her issues. So we went from being kind of homeless, not knowing what to do, where to go, kind of always with that hypervigilance, right? That kind of one eye always open, kind of just keeping an eye out to make sure we're safe. To all of a sudden, I go from that environment to nice house on a lake near a beach. Like it was a wild 180. But my mom still had her issues. In that position, to be honest with you, what happened is the symptoms got so glaring, they got so intense. And I remember when I was about 9 years old or so, I started actually drinking and taking drugs my mom had to cope with the symptoms, right? That was kind of my escape at the time because I didn't know what to do, right? And I remember at that time I wasn't mute anymore. So I was mute for about a year and a half. And at that time, I remember honestly really thinking, no one's going to fix this for me. No one's going to figure this out. And I knew in my heart I wasn't doing things for attention. I wasn't doing things to prove a point. I was doing things because I had no control. By this time, I was sleepwalking. I was self-injuring while sleepwalking. I was getting sick all the time. I was kind of in and out of hospitals, seeing psychiatrists on medications at 8 or 9 years old. So it was really seen as kind of, look what happened to her. This is how she's responding now. I remember doctors telling me and telling my parents with me in the room, it's not likely she's ever going to have, a relationship or be able to maybe even possibly work. She might develop a personality disorder. Like, we need to get her on the right trajectory. So for me, I started kind of taking things into my own hands at a young age and trying to just self-soothe. That was my focus is how do I get this to where this isn't just killing me, right? So for me, I kind of leaned into some more unhealthy coping mechanisms because I didn't know what else to do. And then that became the focus, right? The focus now was, look at this little girl who is now doing these things. There's a problem there. And it really, looking back, I can see, and at the time it felt like no matter what I did, the problem wasn't getting addressed. The symptoms were getting looked at and judged. Things were getting perceived certain ways. I was getting these labels already at this age. I was getting diagnoses that obviously I had no idea what they meant at the time. All I knew was I don't feel good. I don't feel safe. And it doesn't feel like anyone's doing anything about it. And I don't know what to do. So we ended up moving back to Michigan. This is when I was around 10 years old. And around that time, we weren't necessarily in the position of having like the big house with the lake on the beach. Some things had gone down between my mother and my stepdad and a lot of debt from my mom's medical issues. Around that time, my parents were really hoping, for whatever reason, I really hope this change of location just solves things. I remember my mom telling me, we're going to move and you're just going to kind of get through this, get over this. This is going to be in the past. And that didn't happen for me. Unsurprisingly, I moved and my problems came right along with me. So this is when my parents started seeking out psychiatrists heavily. They started seeking out therapists, trying to talk with people about what was going on. In the meantime, dealing with the addiction issues that I was having. I also developed other unhealthy coping mechanisms like an eating disorder, things like that, where I was just trying to cope. I couldn't handle what was going on inside of me. And at the time, I started developing this aversion to doctors and psychiatrists and therapists. And I started really associating the people that want to help me, they don't help, they harm. So I started isolating to where my parents would say, "How are you feeling?" "Feeling great. Feeling fine. Everything's fine," because I don't want to deal with this. And I myself was hoping, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why, but maybe it will pass. Maybe I can distract myself over here, or maybe I can try to get into this hobby or something. And I do think that the move and not being in the environment that my father had passed away relieved the stress enough to where I had more capacity than I did. As I was getting older, I think some of the medications I was on did help me at the time. But it's just nuts to me looking back at age 9, 10, 11, 12, I was racking up diagnoses left and right. And aside from that, I was trying different treatments and medications for these diagnoses that would be like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. So that was kind of my experience of just trying different things, right? And at the time being a child, right? So it wasn't like I could go to my doctor and say, "Hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'd like to try." No, it was more of, here's what we think might be going on. Let's see what doesn't make us most liable in case it goes wrong. And according to that, we'll try this treatment. And if it goes wrong, you're acting out. That's kind of how it felt at the time, if I'm honest. So it was definitely a rough period looking back. But I remember I made a friend in school one time who had similar issues as me. I can honestly say at this time, I was probably 12, 13. I had been put on ADHD medications. I was on antipsychotics. I had multiple anti-anxiety medications. I was in the process of possibly being put on an antidepressant. And I remember this person said to me, this was in school, and I couldn't do PE. This was a recurring issue in my schooling. Why isn't she trying? And she said, "I can relate to what you have going on, and you give me hope because you're fighting it." And she was a person that maybe was just more introverted than I am extroverted. I don't know. But she had talked with me, and it occurred to me, wow, some of my experiences, maybe they can help others. And that kind of lit a light inside of me I hadn't had before. I can honestly say I don't know if I'd experienced hope at that point in my life, or the feeling that there's a purpose to anything. So I look back at those times as very difficult, but I did have these kind of moments sprinkled in there that showed me that this isn't going to be all crap, right? At least there's something that can come out of this. When that person and I became friends and would kind of talk with each other, and it's interesting because we were in different points in life, right? Like she had a very different home life and environment than I did. We had these commonalities, but that interaction I had with that person that showed me if I fight this and I move forward and I figure out what's going on, maybe I can help other people. That fueled me. So that turned into something that worked for me. So that's one of those memories I look back on very fondly, where I'm like, that's what got me through those periods of time. I'd think of her face and just think of that person saying, "You gave me hope in that moment. And if you can do it, maybe I can do it." And she said that it motivated her to want to advocate for herself. Because that's something about me, especially when I was younger, is I always had that fight energy. I was always kind of like, I remember a doctor looking me in the face and saying, "You're never going to recover." And I was like, "Yeah, over my dead body, buddy." Like I was kind of that person when I was younger. Very feisty, but always very much like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. Don't know what's going on, but if it's happening to me, it's happening to other people. And if any of the adverse events I've been through, that means it's happened at least to one other person. So maybe I can try to find some type of, maybe not even solution, but at least an answer at some point. So that moment, that became my driving force in life. I was like, I'm going to figure out what is happening to me, why it's happening to me, how to get out of this, and how to help others get out of this. So yeah, it's just an experience I wanted to share with you. And it's so funny because I was so young when that thought occurred to me, but I was just like, there's got to be a way. Like, there's no way this is happening and I'm just going to be like this forever. Like, this is crazy.
That is absolutely incredible that you had that insight at such a young age and were thinking that, because I would think, because this was just about all you'd ever known.
Yeah.
And when you don't know anything different, I would imagine it can feel like, well, getting past this is going to be impossible. And the adults don't know what to do. So how on earth am I going to be the one to figure it out? But you had something in you that was just strong and determined, and that drive to help others was also very impressive at such a young age. So that is really, really incredible. I think says a lot about you. I don't imagine, though, it was all right, quick fix, we figured it out, and yeah.
No, not at all. And I think that part of that drive, too, came from having parents that had the same thing going on. And I'll say the environment I grew up in was very dysfunctional. My mom had a lot of issues outside of CFS and even outside of addiction. And I remember thinking, whatever is really going on with her, I'll bet it's affecting her and causing some of this. And I'd love to find a way to just like not have that happen for
Love it.
her, for me, for whoever. But this is crazy because there are a lot of people in my family that have had similar issues. And this is before I ended up leaving home. So this was about age 14 or 15. I remember thinking, there's just got to be a solution. There's no way. Like, there's got to be. At that time, I had read. This is kind of dorky, but my dad was in school for clinical psychology when he passed away, and he was about to graduate. I found a lot of joy reading his books, the psychology books, right?
Wow.
And I remember reading about trauma and familial cycles and things like that. And I'm like, gosh, there's a lot of overlap for me personally of things that I've been through, things that have happened, how my body is responding. Like, there's got to be overlap here because this runs in my family. And I remember thinking, I remember reading about nature versus nurture. And I remember thinking, like, who cares? Let's figure out what's going on. And I remember, it's so interesting. I remember sitting there in my room just thinking, like, oh, I better figure this out one day. And it really did. It used to be my main focus. I would just sit there. I would spend time alone, looking into things, reading things, and just sit there and just pray and hope that one day I'd figure out what was going on. And that got me through because at a very young age, I started developing depression symptoms, right? So I started getting, I had this
Okay.
kind of part of me that was in this fight energy of, I'm going to figure this out. But swinging to the other side, I had this very, very dark part of me that was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if it's worth even trying moving forward. So I was always kind of toggling between those two sides, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And I think it would be shocking if you weren't toggling back and forth. Really hard to go through something like this and not be experiencing severe depression and hopelessness at least some parts of the time.
Yeah, and I ended up, for the addiction issues I was having, I ended up begging and pleading with my parents because I wanted to leave the environment I was in. I was like, please put me in long-term treatment, which I know sounds crazy. I mean, I'm a member of the alcoholism and addiction recovery community. Very rarely have I heard anyone say, I begged people to put me in long-term treatment, but I begged them. I couldn't handle what was going on. And I just felt like maybe if I got a change of environment, maybe if I treated what's going on, they could help me. And I went to kind of a rather hardcore long-term treatment center. And that was an experience in itself. There were a lot of aspects of that that didn't necessarily help me, but it got me outside of the environment that I was in, that I really associated with a lot of garbage, right? Everything that had happened up to that point, it was like a cycle. It's like I would even see my mom and I'd start to get symptoms and I'd start feeling like, oh gosh, it is in my head, like these doctors have told me. And getting out of that environment into a new environment and being able to look at things a little more objectively definitely helped me. But I, in essence, from that point when I got out of there, I, in essence, ran away from home at that point. So I was 16. I had been evading and avoiding home from age 14, but I was kind of formally out of the house at 16. And I had to scrap things together. And I had to do that while dealing with illness. I will say that my mom was dealing with her own issues, wasn't very supportive, had a lot going on. My stepdad was helping her with that. And I was kind of figuring things out. So I ended up nestling into the 12-step recovery community. And I feel very fortunate that I had people rise up and help me at a very young age. They gave me couches to sleep on. They gave me food to eat. They gave me hope in different ways that I'd never experienced. There were certainly some downsides to that scenario. Just like anywhere you go, you have people with not the best intentions. You have people that want to take advantage or harm. But for the most part, I just feel truly and genuinely grateful for that community and helping me, not knowing what was going on, but helping me regardless. Honestly, I worked kind of a shifty way, a little illegally for some restaurants at age 16. I found a restaurant. It was actually a really, really yummy Chinese place. But I ended up kind of explaining everything that was going on to this poor woman. I mean, I went in there and said, can I work for you? And she goes, you're too young. And I said, oh, well, I have this and that and this. And for some reason, it connected with her and she let me work there. So that helped me, right? And that's something that when I look back on my story, I can see that although there is a lot of missing pieces, maybe family-wise, or maybe when it comes to having protectors or people guarding me in that kind of way, but things always came through, right? There was always like someone there to help me in the moments that I needed help. And this is one of those moments. So I with the help of her and my stepdad, although he was kind of dealing a lot with my mom's stuff and she had issues with him helping me, he would help me here or there. And I had periods of time where I was homeless. And it's interesting, all the meanwhile, I was working multiple jobs. I was working at the Chinese place. I was babysitting. I was cleaning houses. I always had multiple things going and I was running on adrenaline. I'd have periods of time like this period of time where I remember thinking, wow, I found this 12-step program. I worked their program in the way that they describe how to do it. I feel like I'm a new person. I'll bet I've recovered. And I'd just be on this high. I just feel like, wow, I did a lot of personal development work and I feel good about myself. And sure, I have debilitating headaches and I have widespread body pain, but at least I don't have those dissociative episodes, or at least I'm not in a position where I can't walk right now because I've been there. I've been bedridden, right? But it's interesting is I had these kind of high highs where I'd find some solution that would work for me. But I remember I got my first place. I had gotten, I think it was mono. I had a few illnesses back to back to back. And I remember I went into work doing direct care work one day and I just collapsed. And when I went home to rest it off, I didn't leave the house for another couple of months. I had gotten sick. I'm trying to think of how old I was at this time. I may have been 17. I was in a position where I was having a lot of health issues, right? So I go to doctors at the time and they'd say, well, try this treatment. I can't afford it. You should go to this clinic. How? I don't have insurance. So I had this experience where I'd be trying to meet with people in a certain position in their life that I wasn't at. So they give me these suggestions. I formally got diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And at the time they had said, you have fibromyalgia, you probably have CFS. I will say at the time they felt that it was completely psychosomatic. So they had said, there's this line of behavioral therapy, we'd like you in for this. And I said, I can't afford that. I can barely afford to live right now. And it got noted on my chart that I was refusing treatment. And I'm sure many people can relate to the fact of being kind of medically blacklisted, right? So I would go to another doctor and I'd say, I need your help, but I need something I can actually do because I don't have any money. And they say, well, why don't you have any money? Why don't you want to work? So I was dealing with desperately trying to clean up my life, figure out what was going on, always researching, working, keeping my head above water, playing whack-a-mole with stress, while kind of facing this situation where I'd felt like, wow, I should really be receiving help, but I'm not receiving help. So for me, all of that kind of piled up. And then when I got ill, it kind of collapsed. And that's what I noticed, even at that time, was, wow, these stressors tend to pile on. And then it tends to affect me at once, and I tend to kind of dip and crash. So I had this kind of boom bust cycle going where I'd be on top of the world, running. But if any stressor came up and stopped me or forced me to rest, it was like Pandora's box would open. And it's like all my symptoms would come up again. So I don't know if you ever had an experience like that, but I know for me, I would just find myself in these positions where I'd think, wow, I'm doing really good. And then life stressor and I'm down to the bottom again.
Yeah, which can be so hard to keep pulling yourself back up because you're like, I thought I was past this. I didn't think I was still here. How am I back here? What do I do now? Like, how is this ever going to get better? So you eventually did start, like, how did you get onto that path of finding things that were going to get you to where you are right now?
Yeah. It's interesting. What got me on that path is I had gotten to a position where I went through a ton of issues and I was higher functioning again, right? I had tried some personal development work. I was in therapy. I was working on fears. I was convinced at the time it was like this fear-based issue and it was all emotional and whatnot. And then my mom passed away, and she passed away from sudden heart failure, which connected these dots for me. I went on this tirade in my head because I was at the time researching ME/CFS and whatnot. And I was convinced, oh, she died from that and so on and so forth. And I went from having this fight energy to this just hopeless, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this anymore. And when I look back, it makes me sad because it's like, if I were to look from an outside perspective, I just see someone just breaking. She passed away. I lost my business, my cleaning business I had, the only job that worked for me because I could manipulate and control every aspect of it so that I wasn't necessarily physically working. All those things kind of crumbled. And then a week later, I had a slip and fall accident on ice where my labrum tore. I had to have surgery. After the surgery, I went from, again, higher functioning to barely being able to function. And at this time, there had been some changes medically, right? So I started seeing doctors that would say, oh, you have myalgic encephalomyelitis. And I'm like, I have what? Because at the time it was CFS and it was in my head.
Yeah.
So they would say, you have myalgic encephalomyelitis. And that's all it took for me to go to the polar opposite side of the spectrum and say, this is not mental, this is all physical. So I went through my phases of trying to figure out what was going on. And in the process, I was getting just devastated with having to argue with doctors and trying to just get care. I remember one of the medications I was on, I don't know if we can mention those or not, but I was on low dose naltrexone. And where I'm at in Michigan, they don't commonly prescribe it at all. And I had a doctor and I said, this is the medication I want to try. I've tried everything else. I have this pain, etc.
Mhm.
And she said, there's no way I'm putting you on an experimental medication. Look at your history. This is probably trauma related, etc. And I pulled up some studies. I quite literally cornered this woman and said, I'm giving you information showing you could be causing me harm by not prescribing me this with what's going on right now. How far does this have to go until you'll prescribe it? And she did. She prescribed it. And I remember thinking, God, I don't feel good about the interaction. I don't like the person I'm becoming in the face of the medical system, in the face of even just these symptoms. And I remember thinking, maybe I can do something in my downtime between symptoms, between issues to educate myself, but really kind of, if I'm honest, help me argue better with doctors to get things accomplished and maybe even advocate for other people. So I got a health coaching certification in functional medicine and integrative health. That's something that was always really fascinating to me. And that opened my eyes to the nervous system, right? That opened my eyes to the idea of that everything is interconnected. So I was looking at it like, oh, well, first off, I have a mental condition. Okay, now it's just physical. I had to really look at and acknowledge, oh, it's probably a bit of both and then some, affecting my whole person. And it was really fascinating to me. So I started kind of going into functional medicine, integrative health, reading a lot of literature, well, diving into personal development. I read a lot of stories of people who suffered and went through a lot of terrible things and how they coped with those things. So for me, I ended up, what happened is I fast forward years later, COVID hits, things didn't go well for me. I ended up moving from where I felt safe because it no longer felt safe for me. I moved far away. I reclused quite a bit. And I was not doing so hot, to say the least. And I ended up having an interaction with a doctor. And the doctor had said, why don't you go on Facebook and try to join some groups so that you can relate to people? Because you're going insane. She said this to me. She said, you're going insane. I care about you, but all you're doing is researching CFS. And she was right. It's all I did. So I ended up joining your group on Facebook, a few other ones. And one day I was on there and I saw somebody post. It was actually Alexandra. I saw somebody post, I recovered, and here's how. And what was appealing to me is the kind of back and forth on it. People were like, wow, that's amazing, or wow, you're full of crap, or you name it. It was on this comment feed and it drew me to it. And I thought, how brave and I'll be honest, my mind naturally went to, this person's probably not recovered. They probably never had it. But regardless, she's brave. So I'm going to message her. So I messaged her, and her experience and story just seemed so far from what could happen from me, but I was interested. And it was something different than kind of the hole I was in, right? It was something outside of what's happening to me. And I'll tell you what, that was the door that opened for me to enter recovery, because I had been approaching things from, I'm going to figure out how to medicate this out of me. I'm going to figure out how to behaviorally modify this out of me. I even at one point tried spiritual measures. I've tried dang near everything, but I hadn't tried nervous system work. So she had said, I did this through ANS Rewire. And I looked into it a little bit, and it just aligned so much with those psychology books that I had read, the neuropsych books, the clinical psychology, some of the things that I looked into, the things that I had read. And I actually signed up for ANS Rewire. And at this time, I had just gotten out of being bedbound. I had periods of time where I'd be bedbound, and what I refer to as adjustment periods, but I go into these kind of flare-ups, adjustment periods, whatever you want to call them. I'd go into them for extended periods of time. I'd just come out of one of these states, and I was like housebound for sure. I was couch-bound. I was kind of like using a rollator to get from the couch to the bed. People were doing everything for me that needed to be done. But I committed. I said, I'm watching these videos that he has. I'm going to watch them, and I don't care if it kills me, because this is something that I've never looked into. And this quote came to mind that I heard in the kind of recovery community for addiction, which is probably going to butcher this, but it's you have to do things you haven't done to get things you haven't got. And that quote came to mind for me when I thought about, am I going to do this? Am I going to risk pushing myself into having more symptoms? Because I keep getting lower and lower. And it was like a huge light bulb moment. I watched Dan Newfer's videos and everything clicked. It made so much sense. And it was like, as I was watching them, it's like I was grieving, right? I was thinking of all these appointments I've had, and I'm like, if they only knew. But I remember thinking, wow, this is straight up my nervous system. And it made so much sense when I remember he talked about how if you kind of swing one way, the nervous system comes back in the opposite. So I'd have symptoms. And I would say, no, I'm going to either push through these and kind of get them out of the way, or I'm not going to do anything because I don't want them to come up. And it made sense that when I would push, you bet my nervous system would come back and it would pull the rug from under me. And this is the first time I came across the idea that my nervous system wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to help me. Whereas up until this point, every method I had tried of getting better was kind of under the assumption that there was something wrong with me, that I was malfunctioning. There was something inside me that was haywire, that was targeting me or acting against me. And this gave me this feeling of, no, I'm like coming home to myself, because at the end of the day, my nervous system's trying to protect me. It just doesn't have the right information. So that was a huge shift for me. That opened the door to everything for me, was going through that program, getting that information and feeling, I think the most powerful thing was I didn't feel alone anymore. And connecting on groups made me feel not alone, but I always felt like an outsider. I was the type of person that would compare rather than relate. So I would watch a recovery interview and I'd think, wow, that's really inspirational, but you don't know what it's like to be sick your whole life. Or it's really inspirational, but you don't know what it's like to have this symptom or that symptom. Or I had a nervous system that was very attuned and wasn't wanting to relate, because in a way that kind of hope of getting better wasn't safe. But then when I started learning that all of these things make sense for me, for what I'm going through, and that my experience was valid, it changed everything for me. So that's what opened up the door for recovery for me. Totally.
That is absolutely incredible. And Alexandra's wonderful. She's now has been for a
I
long
love
time
her.
as a moderator in the Facebook group. And I've interviewed her here.
Yeah.
So I'll link that up here if anyone wants to check it out. I've also interviewed Dan Neufer from ANS Rewire multiple times. So I can put in the video description some videos from his program, and talks about some of his strategies, or if people want to learn more about that, because both really incredible people coming at this with all heart and truly care, and a ton of insight and personal experience to back it up. So did that give you everything you needed to get to where you are now, or were there other pieces along your journey?
So for me, I will say that didn't give me everything I needed. And I think just the sheer amount of different symptoms I had and the nature of some of them. At the time I was dealing with dissociative episodes, I was dealing with things where if a certain amount of stress came up, I actually couldn't cope. I would go into convulsions, or I would go into these dissociative episodes where all of a sudden I lost time. I don't know what happened, but I'm hearing that I'm talking to people just fine. So I had a lot of stuff going on. So what happened is I came out of that freeze response with Dan Neufer's program, which was amazing. But when I came out of that freeze response, I had adrenaline. I didn't know how to deal with that adrenaline, and I did not respond in a way that soothed the fight or flight in my nervous system, and I went backwards, right? So I started seeing the symptoms as something to be personalized. I started thinking, gosh, I couldn't move, but now I have so much anxiety. Is every time I gain any type of traction, am I going to go back 10 steps? And I started going back to the kind of starting place. Is this the right solution for me? What am I going to do? I started talking to therapists. I couldn't find a person in this world outside of Dan Neufer who knew what was going on at the time in the form of any type of actual one-on-one help, right? I couldn't afford to meet with him. I couldn't afford, I found a therapist that fully was on board, couldn't afford to see them, right? I was in this kind of spot where now I know help is available, but I feel awful because I feel like it's just not available to me. And at the same time, I went through a breakup. I had been engaged. I was with a long-term partner at the time, and he broke up with me. He's, like I said, not doing great. I had gone from being able to walk from my mailbox to back. When I went through ANS rewire to kind of barely being able to get out of bed. So I went through this breakup. My stepdad had just moved back from Arizona and allowed me to come into his home. The timing of this is wild to me, how this happened, but he moved back and then this happened and then I was able to move in. But I just wanted to mention that when I was in ANS Rewire with Alexandra, she had formed this group of people, this group of women that were supporting each other, that helped each other along the process. I didn't know how to respond to that. It was kind of overwhelming to me. I wasn't used to that sort of help, but I just need to mention that that group of women was so healing for me. And that it's just such a healing space to have groups of people who know what's going on, but know there's a solution, get together. So if there's ever any kind of advice I could give, is linking up with those people that know recovery is possible. So when I went to this breakup, I moved in with my stepdad and I started looking at other programs. I had a friend who had also gone through ANS Rewire, who then went through a program called CFS Recovery. And when she went through that program, I saw so much improvement in such a short period of time. I was like, I have to at least see what this is about. So I joined the YouTube channel. I started following it, and I wasn't necessarily impressed at first. I was leery of really any solution, but I figured, what, I'm going to get on a call with this guy, Miguel, who has CFS Recovery, and I'm just going to see what this is about. And I can tell you that that's the first time somebody said to me, I can see you getting out of this. All the crap you've been through has led you to this point, and there's a solution. When he said it so confidently too, and I was like, I was prepared for an argument. I was prepared for some back and forth, pulling up studies, you name it. And it's interesting as previous to this point in time, I had said to myself, I got about one more try in me. And then I don't know if I can do this anymore because I've just tried so much. So I figured, what? I'm going to give it my best bet. So I signed up for CFS Recovery. I will say, full disclosure, I'm a coach there now. I absolutely love working there.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just absolutely love it. But talk a little bit about my experience there. I joined, and what really drew me to it was that I had a coach. I loved ANS Rewire. It worked so well for me at the stage I was at. But when I entered that adrenaline, I didn't have anyone specifically to say, here's what you do. And in CFS Recovery, a lot of the information felt similar. I liked that it wasn't necessarily meditation or spiritual based. It felt more of a science-based thing to me. And I had a coach that helped me in that golden question in recovery. When do I nudge forward? When do I pull back? I had answers to that, and I was ecstatic about it. So I just kind of decided, if I'm going to try this, I'm going to give it my all, because what else do I have to lose at this point? So I started working with my coach. I started learning information. I started learning about how I had reached my stress threshold, right? It wasn't that I made some bad choices, then this happened. It wasn't that I had a faulty system. I started learning that I had a nervous system that desperately wanted to protect me, but over time has gotten information that has told it that many, many things are unsafe. So it's just trying to help me, like kind of like an annoying roommate that has good intentions, but we're just not on the same page, that's following me around all the time. And it used to feel like a bully. It used to feel like I had a bully on my back all the time. I changed that to, I have a friend on my back all the time. This nervous system is my friend. It wants to help me. That shift for me was huge. The shift from enemy to friend inside of me made a huge difference for me. So that was kind of my entrance into CFS recovery that ultimately led me to being able to recover. So I try and think of some of the experiences I had that were really meaningful. And when I entered CFS recovery, I was mostly housebound. I was walking with a cane. And within a month, I got rid of the cane, which I had used for years. And what it took for me was being a person that was skeptical, cynical. I needed to see proof, right? And I had to kind of take the first one on faith and say, I'm willing to give this a shot. I had what I refer to as adjustment periods or flare-ups. I had my first one since joining CFS Recovery, and I almost get emotional thinking about it. But I remember going through that first flare-up and thinking, wait a minute, I have somebody I can message during this. I've never had that before. I was so used to isolating and reclusing when I would go through those moments. I was one of those people that you'll see me when I'm well enough to be seen, but I didn't have to hide anymore. I had people that could help me. I had a person I could communicate with regularly to say, I just went through this. I don't know what to do. And I wouldn't get orders barked at me, but hey, this is what I've been through. Here's what some of the science says. Here's some information so you can make an informed decision about what you want to do for your recovery. And that made a huge difference for me.
That is absolutely incredible. As you probably know, I've interviewed quite a few coaches from CFS Recovery.
Yeah.
I've had Miguel on the channel. I think the world of him. He's had his own really rough journey with CFS, so he's been there and he gets it. I know that he really, truly cares. I'm curious who your coach was in the program, if I've interviewed them here.
Oh, Junior. Junior is my coach. Yeah.
I have. We'll link that at the end of this video if people want to check it out. He's incredible.
Great guy, great coach.
Yeah.
He was definitely the kind of steady hand that I needed in my recovery. And I'll say that I had a lot of coaches. I tried a lot of different coaches in my time. I had a lot of different therapists, practitioners, and I used to kind of just read people quickly and decide, am I going to trust this person or not? But what I had was I had a coach that didn't look at me with pity and didn't judge me for the experiences I had gone through. I felt like he treated me like anybody else, and that built trust instantly. And that's kind of the experience that going through CFS recovery gave me. I'm not lower than, I'm not less than, I'm not above, but finding that balance of where am I really? So in that position, I did a lot of nervous system work. When I realized that there are a lot of issues I had over time, I had these different issues, I realized that, wait a minute, I have one nervous system. There's no way that I have this issue that affects it here and that one there and this one here. For me personally, I started really realizing that all of the issues I was having came down to one core issue. My fight or flight was just activated on all the time, right? That's simple. And there were reasons for that, but even going into those reasons weren't as important as seeking the solution, which is over time to expand that stress threshold to where I could handle these things, right? To reprogram the way my brain operated. So for me, that happened over time, and it happened with slow, steady steps. And I thought before this interview about what are some huge words of wisdom I can speak on my recovery journey of when I entered and whatnot. And to be honest with you, when I was in it, I just tried to keep things as simple as humanly possible because I'm an overthinker. That's what I was thinking. I'm an overthinker. And again, I have to try things I haven't done to get what I haven't got. So I'm going to try not to complicate this. I'm not going to regiment it. I'm not going to come in hot with some fad diet and track my steps and do this and do that. I threw it all out the window and I said, what? I'm going to do what's recommended of me, and I'm going to learn to befriend my nervous system. And I feel like a lot of people would say again, but like for me, it was the first time. I'm going to make friends with this part of me in my brain, not in my head, but in my brain, this amygdala that wants to protect me so desperately. I'm going to teach it that it's okay and I'm safe and that everything's fine. There's no need to do that. I'm going to be okay. So for me, that took time. And one of the biggest things that I learned was when I was thinking, gosh, I really wish life would just chill. Like I want to have this bubble where I can get better. So I kept having life stressors come up. Like I had multiple chemical sensitivity and I was in a construction zone. So I had to wear these masks and this suit. It was a whole vibe. I had somebody I was dating ended up kind of going off the deep end. I had to get a restraining order. I had a friend pass away. I had things happen in my recovery that I would just kind of respond and say, it's not fair. But then it dawned on me, no, these are the things that are going to make me recover because these are the opportunities I have to respond in a different way than I used to change my nervous system for the good. So when I started seeing obstacles and curveballs as opportunities, my life changed completely. So that's the biggest thing that aided me in my recovery was realizing that not just symptoms, but life stressors, when I can respond in a way that soothes my nervous system, I teach myself safety, right? And when I can teach myself safety, I can recover. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of just my reflection on it.
Oh, it is brilliant. I have goosebumps. I don't think I've heard anyone say it like that. That is so incredible and such an important and valuable insight, because so many of us get caught up in the like, oh no, stress, I'm never going to get better. My nervous system's already in a bad place. Like, I just make it stop. And I couldn't say it better than you just said it. That was absolutely brilliant. And I just keep thinking about little Ariel that wanted to get past this and help other people, and now you're here and that's what you're doing and having this immeasurable impact on the world and people out there who are also struggling. So I'm so happy for you and just so grateful that you're here helping other people who need it too. I know it's a great program. I've interviewed so many people that have been through it and have nothing but great things to say about it. And it's wonderful that you're a part of it as well. So very, very happy for you. Going to link that junior video here to check out. He's incredible.
He
If
is.
people
He's such a
haven't
great
seen it,
coach.
you're going to love him. Yeah, he's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for bravely telling this incredibly tough journey that you've been on. I'm sure for so many people, it's just going to mean so much to hear it, and they'll feel less alone, and to know that there is hope. No, even if this started when you are 7, it doesn't mean that you can't get past this as well. So thank you for being here, Ariel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's just wonderful to be in this position. And I'm here to say that if I can do it, you guys can do it too. There's a lot of different routes, there's a lot of different paths, ways of viewing things and doing things, but don't give up, you guys. Keep moving forward. And if it gets too much, that's okay. Don't quit. Take a break, take a rest, and get back at it, because there are solutions out there. And it just takes some time of finagling and finding your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, all of this will be linked in the video description. So if you want to learn more about CFS recovery, or you get to work with coaches like Ariel to support you along your journey, all that information is there. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. Miguel has a ton of free information too. He has his own YouTube channel. He puts out so much stuff. So you don't even need to be in the program to be learning from the coaches and from him and from the approach that they use. So yeah, thank you again, Ariel. Thank you again, everyone who's watching. And I hope to see you in this next video with Junior.